I am here with Dennis Furia today, designer of Deck of Wonders, a solo and cooperative game, which is on Kickstarter right now, and you can go check it out. Dennis, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It is morning on my side of the globe, but it has just been a thrilling couple of weeks here. I say couple of weeks. It's been like a week and 2 days or something. It's felt like a month. The Kickstarter has been live, but yeah, I'm happy to take some time out, get to know you, and hang out a bit.
Yeah, I'm super happy to talk to you because the Kickstarter looks right up my alley.
Yay!
I've been playing a ton of solo games and it looks really awesome. Could you tell me about the game, like a quick pitch?
Absolutely. It's so funny because when I started working on Deck of Wonders, it was obviously well before the pandemic and COVID and all that stuff. And you don't wish this on anyone, but certainly having a solo game in this time, it's spoken to people in a way that I don't know if it would have otherwise. But yeah, so the story of the game is that you have stolen the Deck of Wonders from Fate herself. And you can think of Fate as the deity that rules the world of the game. And the Deck of Wonders is her treasured magical possession. So it's an incredibly powerful artifact that has all of her power and potential and is kind of her tool for shaping the world. And you've stolen it from Fate, you rascal. So she's understandably furious with you. She's trying to get it back, and she's sending all of her followers after you to reclaim it. Not only that, but there are darker forces in this world who see an opportunity to swoop in and take the deck for themselves. So it's a little bit of like a One Ring situation going on, where you've taken something without really realizing how powerful it is, and now everybody wants a piece of you, and you're just trying to survive and kind of get to the next phase. So that's the convention of the game story wise. It plays like a Hearthstone or like a Magic the Gathering. It's kind of got a CCG format to it, although obviously it runs solo. This is a one player versus the rules game. So instead of another player on the other side, there will be a villain that you choose at the start of the game. Every villain sets special rules, has special powers, and has special legacy packs that you can unlock. So this game evolves as you play it. And then the final thing is that every villain has some special cards that you have to use in your deck if you are facing that villain. And then that's probably the biggest hook of Deck of Wonders is both you and your opponent draw from the same deck of cards. And every card is double-ended. So there's a top half that you use if you draw the card. There's a bottom half that you use if the villain draws the card. But as you're deck building, every card you put in is a choice for both you and the villain. You have to kind of balance and build accordingly. And that's Deck of Wonders.
What really gets me in the game is like what you said as a legacy element, which it's more of a campaign though, isn't it? Because you can replay it.
Yeah, so I think if I could go back and kind of rebrand, as it were, I would have said campaign probably instead of legacy. There is you will have opportunities to upgrade cards, and so you'll place a sticker on certain cards that you want to be a little bit more powerful. However, there will be a way to do that without stickering the cards, because what I learned very quickly is people don't like messing with cards. People want to keep it pristine. They don't want a sticker. They don't want to tear anything up, which there's certainly none of that in the game. And while it tells a discrete story, I think the fun of the game, like any CCG, is in kind of experimenting with different builds and strategies overall. So I think legacy is what I've used to describe it in the past. Campaign probably does a better job articulating that you won't be destroying the game as you play it. But campaign also implies one time through, whereas Deck of Wonders evolves as you play and will continue to be playable and present interesting challenges even well after you're done with the story portion.
Yeah, but I think what you've done is you have like the best aspects of legacy games, which is I think unlocking that new content and feeling that progression throughout the game. Well, whilst like
Yeah.
I have a Pandemic Legacy on my shelf, and it just breaks your heart when you're destroying parts of the game. And I think
Yeah.
it's really awesome that you both use like storyline in the game, like with the individual cards themselves, and you have this way of progressing through the game and having those choices of how you want the game to kind of continue from at least from what I saw from the demo. Uh,
Yeah, thank you so much. Someone the other day told me, they're like, "Dude, it's not a legacy game. You have 10 mini expansions." I was like, "Man, I should have said that. That sounds cool." But yeah, I mean, it is also, in that CCG format, collectible card game format. It is very expandable, and it will be easy if this is successful enough. I'm so in the habit of doing these interviews before the Kickstarter has launched, and so I'll be like, if it's successful, it's been successful. So I expect expansions will happen at some point. But I'll be able to add on to the story, add on new mechanics and everything through expansions as we go as well. So there's a lot in the base deck of wonders. It's going to be evolving for a long time before you've seen everything. And like I said, even then, I think it's a ton of fun to go through challenge decks and weird off meta builds and everything like that. And then I should be able to offer expansions to go along with the game.
yeah, there's lots of customization already. Just like when you read through the rules, you have several different variants of how to build a deck. How many cards are actually in the base game?
Yeah, there will be over 200 cards in the base game.
All right. And how long have you been working on
And
the game?
good question. In earnest since June 2019. So a little over a year at this point.
When you started out with the idea, what was your like core inspiration, or how did you decide you want to make a game in the first place?
Yeah, yeah. You might hear my core inspiration screaming in the background at some point during this interview. I'm a parent of young kids. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and then we have one on the way in December, which is super exciting. But that means my life is super busy and hard to plan. And that's not a problem for parents. That's a problem for adults, right? You don't need kids to have your life be chaotic and have it be hard to schedule with friends. But I also love complex, thinky games. The bigger the rule book, the better is my policy. I love reading rule books, and can lose a ton of time to games like Mansions of Madness or XCOM, the board game, or any of those games that are just super dense. But it can be hard to coordinate the 8 hours and 6 friends and 2 tables worth of space that it takes to actually play those games. So Deck of Wonders was my attempt, combined with really loving CCGs as well. My attempt to create that kind of deep strategic experience, just in a format that you can enjoy on your own terms. That if you've got 15 minutes between classes, if your kids are down for a nap, that's my story, right? If you're on lunch break, you should be able to get out Deck of Wonders, feel like you had a really interesting, deep experience, feel like you progressed in a larger story, but also, not have to coordinate with friends, also be able to put it away when you're done with it and kind of have this little bit of wonder. It's a little cheesy, I know, but you have this little bit of wonder in your pocket for you whenever you kind of feel like playing it.
There goes your inspiration.
Yeah.
How long do you think it took you to get that core of the game, and when did you know you want to push it out to Kickstarter?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had the idea for the game in June 2019. We went on a vacation in early July as a family, in a cabin up in Michigan, which is north of us. And I had a deck of playing cards and spent the entire time just like prototyping and play testing and messing around. And nobody in my family knew what the hell I was doing. Like we were with extended families. So my brothers and sisters are like, well, Dennis is in his corner again. But I was really excited about the way the idea of a double-ended card could open up new options for play and have interesting deck building choices. So I was excited about that. I developed it to the point that I actually had a prototype, and it was kind of the prototype that's on Tabletop Simulator right now. It was just even more simple. There was no art. It was literally boxes that I made in PowerPoint printed out at a business card manufacturer. But Gen Con was around the corner, and I was going to be at Gen Con regardless. And I kind of had this moment with myself where it's like, all right, if you believe you're onto something and you're going to be at Gen Con, it is criminal not to find a way to demo this. So I took these artless prototypes, used in every sense of the word, artless prototypes, and went. I didn't have time to be like an exhibitor at Gen Con, but I went to the Starbucks across the street from Gen Con, and posted up there, and just had a sign up that was like, if you like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, I need your feedback. And it wound up being amazing because everybody was, the Starbucks was slammed. Everybody was waiting 20 minutes for their coffee and had nothing better to do than to talk to me about my game. So here I am with the best seat in the house at Gen Con, not even technically attending the con. And I offered up for sale these prototypes for $10, which is, again, it was what you played in Tabletop Simulator, just without any art and way less refined. And people, I think I sold 14 over the course of 2 days. So people were intrigued. Collected a whole bunch of email addresses, and that's the point where I was like, okay, this feels very real. I have transactional learning saying that there is something unique here that people are willing to pay for. And I have to do this. Like this means I have to go to Kickstarter. I'm committed. And from then on out, it was kind of going to Kickstarter was in my crosshairs. I would pull that out, by the way, for any designers listening or people who have aspirations of making a game. I would put a really high priority on some kind of transactional learning up front. That doesn't have to be selling your game. That was right for me. That might not be right for you. It's totally a case by case basis. But asking someone to sign up for an email list, or follow you on Twitter, I don't know what it is, but have some exchange of value that you're asking for, and that will get you past the people just being nice really quickly. It's super valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And when was Gen Con last year? What month?
That was August, the beginning of August.
So you had like 2 months to work on the prototype before Gen Con.
Yeah, I printed it literally the night before, which was fun. I had found the manufacturer and then spent 2 crazy days getting it finished, and then printed it, and then the next morning, headed out to Indianapolis.
Yeah, so it's so important to get your game out there even in the beginning stages, to see other people's feedback, and it's something that I really liked when I talked to Joe Slack. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, he's also making a solo game. Yeah, Relics of Rajavahara. Yeah, that's right. Amazing game, amazing person.
That's right, and what he said was games are made by a community, not by just one designer, and that's because you always need to play test, and you always need to see what people. It's just such an important step of it. It's so much more difficult to do by yourself. So I think it's really important that you mentioned that, and that you mentioned that transaction, making sure that people aren't just being nice. Because
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because then you're just fooling yourself.
No matter how smart you are. Yeah, no matter how smart you are or how amazing you are at design, and there's some people out there that are amazing at design, you reach a point where you're too close to your own game, and you've seen everything you're going to see about it. The only way you're going to see new things is to share the game with new people. And so I absolutely believe it is a community effort. And I mean, this interview is evidence of it. The game design community is so incredibly close and welcoming, and I stepped in day one having no right to be there. This is my first Kickstarter, this is my first game, really, and everyone was here for it, and everybody was interested to chat and give advice and really help people up in the community, which is super cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's super important to have that. What do you do outside of game design? and what made you want to do the whole design thing? Were you playing board games before that?
Yeah. Oh yes. I go way back to childhood with board games, and my brothers and I would play Stratego against each other. Was our favorite, which is I think it falls in the classic board game set. It's like I don't know. It's one of those games. It's as close as you can get to a modern board game without actually being a modern board game. But that was just really fun. And we always would do that, the classic success, and just always had something going. I am very into video games as well. I co-host a video game podcast called The Level, and just in general play a lot. My wife and I actually we play a lot of games together, and that extended over very naturally into board games as an adult. And so our shelves are filled with 2-player games. So you name it, Hive, Star Realms, Codenames Duet, Forbidden Island. You can play with more, but just any game like that. We've got that's our date nights, our way to have fun. And I did a ton of that. The deeper, more complex games, I've got a couple gaming groups that I'm close with, and it's always we're always trying something new, and we probably spend more time arguing over rules than we do playing the game. But that's the fun of it. And so I've done a ton of game playing, and always with that thought of like, oh, that mechanic was really interesting, and you kind of sit around and talk about what could be better about the game after you finished with it, or you make a house rule because you think it would be more interesting, or set a challenge for yourself. And the thing that I didn't realize, and that I would encourage anyone else, is like, if you're doing that sort of thing, making house rules, discussing game mechanics, you're 90% of the way there. Like, that is the exact same thinking that goes into board game design proper. And I think a lot of people have that vocabulary without even realizing how close that is to what you're actually doing in the ring, as it were. So by day, I'm in consulting, did innovation consulting for a while, do a lot of freelance stuff now. And marketing is my background. And then, like I said, I also did the video games podcast. So a lot, the business strategy side, I almost geek out about as much as the game design side.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned the house making house rules, because I think that's one way that you can that you're designing games without even knowing it. Like one thing that we do, is whenever we play a new game, someone of course reads through the rules, explains the game, but then inevitably we get those moments where we're unsure of a rule. We almost never check the rule until the end of the game. Until we're finished, we decide what do we think is best for the game. How should we play this rule? Then we decide how to do that. We do that, and then at the end of the game, we're like, is that the choice that they made too? We check if
that's really cool. I like that a lot. And it's harder to do when it's like a 3-hour game, right? Because it's like, okay, we discovered this rule question in the first 15 minutes. Do we want to invest our night on potentially being wrong? But especially for a game like Deck of Wonders, where it's a 15-minute play, you're afforded some of that fun. Or you're like, all right, this is a stupid build and it's never going to work, but maybe it will. Let's try it. And when your game plays out in kind of a tight loop time-wise, you open up a lot of potential for experimentation and design, game design thinking in people who are playing.
Mm-hmm. How did you find an artist for your game, and how was that whole what was that whole process like?
Yeah, I am the wrong person to ask about it, because my story finding an artist was almost too serendipitous. It was all the way back at Gen Con, where I debuted the game, and I took some time towards the end to just wander around Artist Alley, which, if you ever go to a board game convention, find the section with artists, and just wander around it, because it's the coolest thing ever. There's it's not just game design at these things. It's a whole community around the art that's so cool. And I kind of had an idea of what I wanted stylistically for the game, but didn't have the vocabulary to articulate what that was, which was a lot of me then kind of walking up to artists and fumbling around with my words and not making any sense. and kind of getting nowhere. And I found Lauren Brown's booth. Lauren Brown is the illustrator for Deck of Wonders, and was immediately like, this is the thing that I want. Like, I don't need any vocabulary to describe to you what I'm looking for, because it's just like, what you do is what I want. And it was that perfect and that accidental that I just kind of wandered into her booth. And the skies opened, angels sang. It was, the perfect match. And she was super friendly, super communicative. And certainly since, Lauren has her just vision and ownership for the visual side of this game is amazing. And she always finds cool ways to bring things to the next level. But in terms of finding her, I just lucked into it. I completely lucked into it. A tip that she gave me, and that I would pass along, is if you don't just collide with your perfect artist, find some artists that you kind of like their work stylistically, whether or not they do board games, whether or not they're in your range for what you're looking for. Just find some people that you like their work, and then go look at who they follow in social media. And by just kind of finding their followers and then finding the followers, you can see this web of other artists, and get a whole bunch of cool direction and find really cool people that you can't really turn up just by Google searching.
And you didn't even use any like placeholder art before for your first prototypes, or before you talked to Lauren.
That's right. So when I talked to Lauren, it was no art whatsoever. Now there was an in-between step where, the art for the game is expensive, and Lauren's work is amazing and commands the price that it does. But for the next kind of round of the prototype, I wanted to have some kind of art. So I worked with my sister-in-law, Elsa Furia, and she put together a bunch of thumbnail sketches for me. She's a painter, like that's her main medium, and so her doing like line art and everything like that was way outside her comfort zone. But she was amazing, and I actually still have several copies of that V2 prototype with her art on it. So there is that version out there, and then as kind of a stair step to the full art version.
Yeah, and I think it's so important and awesome, and something that shouldn't be overlooked is the step that you went to Gen Con and you used that as finding playtesters, making sure your game's all right, finding artists, and I think it's super important to find those places where you can show off your game. Even early on, what we did with our first games is we went to all the prototypes contests we could. And because we weren't in the community at all. And I think that's another great thing that people can do when they have a game idea. Well, the first thing they can do is probably make that prototype, but then
have something to show.
But show it off. What would your advice be to people who... I always ask this question to all designers, to people who want to make games or have some idea but haven't gone through the whole process.
Yeah, I think my advice would be expect to iterate. Expect to just have version after version after version. If I look at the version of the game I'm on for Deck of Wonders, in terms of every time I've tweaked a rule or changed a card, etc., I think I'm up in the 40s at this point of changes, easily in the 40s. And that kind of iteration and experimentation is so essential. And it goes back a little bit to the whole, demo your prototype, get transactional learning if you can, but your ideas always seem better and more complete in your head than they do on paper. And it's just the way the human mind works. But we're also weirdly wired to feel like we've failed in some way if the first time we move the idea from our head to paper it's not perfect. And it's such a crazy thing, and it's so wrong, and in fact the only way you get better after a point is to do that prototyping and see in practice how an idea is wrong or how an idea could be better, because it looks too perfect in your mind. It needs to be on paper. And so I've done things where like I'll introduce a new card that I'm working on to the game, knowing that it's broken, and knowing that it's going to wreck the game and be completely unbalanced. But I know that it's broken. I won't know how to fix it until I've played with it. And so I go through a couple excruciating games where I'm just getting wrecked by this card or completely stomping the villain because of this card. And then it's like, oh, okay. I thought it was overpowered because of X, but really it's overpowered because of Y. And if I tamp that down a little bit, I don't have to mess with X, which is actually the fun part of the card. I just need to, tweak it in that way. And you just literally, you can't see that unless you put it on paper, make some kind of prototype, and play with a broken game a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. Again, what you said about the fact that we usually tend to criticize ourselves when it doesn't work out the first time. But I think a lot of that has to do with comparing your game to finished games, and also what you said about the game in your mind working out. Like, I know, and I've talked to a lot of designers, and almost every time I talk to designers, they talk about playing through the games in your head, like imagining how the game would play. And some designers actually go through that phase for like months before they go into prototyping, which is totally not the way that I prefer to do it. But I feel like when you're doing it in your head, you're like, it should work. You think that it should work, and there's a lot of things that you do miss, and the good part of it though is that there's a lot of other things that you can anticipate before you actually get it on paper. Because if you go straight to brainstorming on paper, then I feel like there's more of a chance that you'd miss some stuff. But yeah, either way, I think you shouldn't feel disappointment. Yeah. Is one thing that you should what you should learn is just be okay with having a game that isn't finished.
Oh yeah. It's interesting, because once you get through that, like, it's almost exciting to see every time you play test, like, okay, how is this going to be broken, or how do things go not the way I expect. You mentioned playing things through in your head, and I think one piece that is important to have very clearly articulated in your mind, and even potentially on paper, is kind of the type of experience you want to create. And so I put a link in, and you can share this in the show notes if you want, to a tool that I've used. It's from the marketing world, so this is out of my business background, called an equity pyramid. And this is basically, it's a tool that helps you articulate what you want the experience to feel like to the player, kind of what are you offering in terms of the feel. Because people, sometimes people buy games because there's an interesting hook or mechanic, and certainly a game like poker doesn't need any theme like or anything like that, but more often than not, there's an intersection of mechanics and theme going on that creates an experience for the player. And I think having a very clear vision in your mind, and again, potentially articulated on paper, of this is the core fantasy of the game. The core fantasy of this game is that you are a starship pilot, or, it doesn't have to be theme dependent. The core fantasy of this game is tricking your opponents into hurting themselves. That sort of thing. Knowing that will help guide your decision making as you're doing that iteration. So for Deck of Wonders, for example, the core fantasy is outplaying an objectively more powerful opponent. Everything in the game is bent around that idea of fate favors the villains, right? She wants them to win. Literally, like the cosmos is against you here, and so all the rules and mechanics feel like the villain is getting all these advantages that you don't. And the game plays like you're almost on defense, on your back foot, scrambling for answers the entire game. And that's very intentional because it serves this core fantasy or this story that you are the underdog. You are, you're only in this because you are so clever, and outplaying these people that by rights should win. And that's my favorite feeling in games, is when I feel like I steal a win that I should have lost. And I think that's, having that in my mind as I'm playtesting and balancing and designing is very empowering.
Yeah, another great point, and it's something that I haven't thought about that much actually, is how you should have that core feeling maybe that you're chasing,
Hmm.
and you
Hmm.
you want to make sure that base your decisions on what you're doing in the game on what that is. Whether it's you want it to be a really good bluffing game, or if you want it to create those like party game, having those player interactions and having
Hmm.
those moments. Find those moments that you love and that you want to be in the game, and just try and make them.
And when you think of it in terms of those moments or those experiences, it gives you so much more freedom to adjust your mechanics the way they need to be adjusted.
Hmm.
Because I think a designer can easily get attached to a mechanical piece of their game, or like that idea that started them down the path. But because they're married to that instead of the experience they're trying to create, ultimately that thing gets in the way of the experience that the designer wants to give the player. But because they have articulated a mechanic instead of an experience, it's harder to see when those mechanics need to change.
Yeah. With the game, did you start off mechanics first, or I'm sure that you've been asked this question before, but did you start with mechanics first or theme first? Did you know that you want to make a collectible card game for one player, or did you know that you want to have mechanics that are like Magic the Gathering, or a theme that's
Yeah,
fantasy and stuff like that?
it's really funny. So no, I actually haven't talked about that much before, so it's a good question. I think it was a mechanics first idea, in terms of, I had been commiserating with some friends. We were playing through Gloomhaven and loving it, but it was so hard to get everyone together, and it takes so long to set up, and all that stuff. So we were also talking about the potential that has as a solo game. Like if you really leaned into just a one player playing, what are all the cool things you could do? So I woke up with the idea in my head the next morning of a card game with the format that, like, you would draw and a card would be one thing to you and it would be a different thing for the villain. And that kind of mechanical hook was the first thing in my mind. What's funny is it must have been a dream or something. The specific thought was a card that was a dragon on one side and the fireball that the dragon shoots on the other. And for whatever reason, that was what was in my head. And that specific card didn't make it into the game, but that kind of duality and the fact that it could be one thing to one person and another thing to another, certainly did. And I think that the idea of duality, and one thing being able to turn out different ways is what led me to the idea of fate, and then the whole story about like what this thing in your hands was kind of spiraled from there. But it really started from that central point of wanting to have this cool CCG experience with just one player.
Anything else? I feel like we've went over the game quite a bit. Anything else you want to share on the podcast, maybe about other games, or what you would like to see in the future from your like design journey?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll do like Kickstarter admin and everything at the end. I think the big thought I will have, and you actually articulated it better than I ever could, which I guess in turn then Joe Slack articulated it better than I could have, which is, the game design is a community thing, and every time I've opened up and invited feedback, or not been protective of Deck of Wonders as it is, and instead invited people to get excited with me about Deck of Wonders as it could be, that has been an incredibly positive experience. And so just I think no matter how strong your vision for the game is, inviting people into that vision and making people feel like they have a say in that vision, or that they belong in the community for that vision, is invaluable. So just having that collaborative mindset has been essential, and has taken the game to places that I couldn't have imagined for myself, and are better than I could have imagined for myself.
Yeah, I think it's so awesome that we're in a community that's where that works, because like I've been in lots of communities where there's so much competitiveness that you actually don't want to be sharing your like creative work. And
Yeah, yeah. It's weird.
And the first time I went into the board game community, I was expecting the same thing because I had never been in a community that's so inclusive and that where people want each other to succeed. And it's so awesome that that's first of all that's the way the community is, because it can easily have been the other way around in this as well. But also, it's so awesome that just spreads, and when people treat you that way, and you see that that's the way things work in this community, and you see that if somebody doesn't respect others, or doesn't give good feedback, or isn't being a good part of the community, basically, you see that those like positive interactions are welcomed, and it's something that spreads so much. And now after I've been, because I've been doing like board game design for the past 2 years or so, and after this I've been using the things I've learned from the because I really feel like it's one of my favorite communities. Maybe my favorite community is the board game community in general, and I feel like I'm able to now use that in other communities where I'm in, because if you're spreading that like positive feedback to people and showing them that their creativity is also important to you, and that you want them to succeed as much as you want yourself to succeed. I found that super valuable, and I'm just really happy. At least from what I've experienced of this community, is just extremely positive.
Yes, indeed.
I think it's time for like closing thoughts.
Sure. I can plug so when this goes up, I think we'll be going into the final 72 or 48 hours of the Deck of Wonders Kickstarter. So it ends at the end of the day, Eastern time, on September 17th. So if you're listening to this now, it is, those first 3 and last 3 days are such a critical window. So I'll put out the big plea of go check out the Kickstarter page. You probably will be able to be in that final rush of people. And actually, because the initial rush was so strong, we were able to make the full digital art book for the game, which has all of Lauren's work, 50 plus pieces, dual-sided pieces, I might add. That is all for free alongside the game, because we funded in 48 hours. In addition, we just yesterday, as of this recording, so a couple weeks ago, as of when people are listening to it, announced a community art competition. And so we've done a ton of art for the game, but we've never shown the protagonist in the game. And that's because the protagonist is you, right? The protagonist is the player. We wanted anyone to feel like they belonged at the center of the story, that it was their world to shape. But so we asked the community, like, hey, draw yourself or draw someone that you love as a protagonist in Deck of Wonders, and add that to the kind of story of the game. And so you should be able to browse that art and see all the amazing people doing it, and B, potentially, if you're quick on the draw, submit a piece yourself, and we'll be randomly drawing one of the entrants to win a free copy of the game. So a little doodle on your part. Hey, a stick figure is fine. Could win you a free copy of Deck of Wonders. And in general, like that community on Kickstarter and in the surrounding socials has been amazing. So check out the game, and please join the community. We love having you.
Awesome. I love that idea of having the protagonist be, unknown, or because when you leave things to the imagination, I feel like it can be cooler.
It's such a unique thing about board and card games as well, that it's a medium that it is fine if you leave those spaces for someone to project themselves into. Whereas a movie or a book or any one of those other mediums, you kind of need to fill in all the spaces. If you don't say it, then it's not there. Whereas in board games, the medium is much more welcoming to the hints of a story, or the kind of the cool hooks that someone then grabs onto, and that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's a problem, like, even with books, if the author goes into over explaining things,
Mhm.
Because if you leave people to fill in the blanks with their imagination, usually it's gonna be they're gonna make it cool for themselves, you know. And
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I really love that whenever I see a game or something done really well in that sense, where it lets you be creative, it lets you sort of not know everything, you know, be in this kind of more mysterious world. It's so awesome. Like, I immediately thought of this old RPG game called Gothic. I don't know if you played it, but
Okay, the name sounds familiar.
there they had a running joke the whole game, and it's like, I think it's 3 or 4 parts, where they had this running joke. The main character was always they'd always cut off when they asked him his name. like, like he'd say, "Hi, my name is," and they would say, "Ah, your name doesn't matter. Let's go and do this quest or whatever." And I thought that was so awesome. Like, and
That's fun.
but yeah, that reminded me of that. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah. Oh, this was a blast. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I hope to get Deck of Wonders at some point soon.
Woohoo! Yes, yes, please.